And that's kind of frightening when you think about it. Yet there are those objective thinkers, and the more they become free, the more that they can influence, if you will, influence the next generation and influence those in their circle of influence, communicate with them effectively and influence them to start thinking differently and realize that freedom is precious and sacred, and that we're so very, very blessed to be here in the most free nation on earth. That's why people still want to come here. Exactly.
And it seems to me like the mantra that's going on right now in the media and everywhere else, at least with the people that I know, I'm sure you've heard this before. If we're willing to give up some of our freedom to be safe. Now, that's a very dangerous statement to make. Have you heard that?
Oh, yes, and I believe it was Ben Franklin. I'm not sure if I'm quoting the correct founding father, but I believe it was Ben Franklin who said, "Those who are willing to give up their freedom for safety deserve neither."
Yes, it was Ben Franklin.
So the founding fathers, while they weren't perfect, they were certainly brilliant, and they were amazingly. They had a great capacity to understand human nature, and so. Yes, that is a very dangerous buzzword, and you get that through the programming where you get people just who have the soccer mom mentality.
Yes.
In other words, do it for me. We know that we must be responsible. Or there are those who, if we don't live by design, we live by default. And so those who live by default tend to abdicate. They don't want the freedom because they don't want the responsibility. They just want to make sure they get to the soccer game on time or make sure they have a beer when they watch their football game. They abdicate it.
Exactly, I agree. And one of the reasons I wanted to expound on freedom is, I'm a student of your Martial Mastery DVD set. And you want to talk about freedom, there are a lot of techniques in there that can literally set your mind free of some of the limited thinking that people have. I was wondering if you could expound on some of those techniques and maybe even share a freebie or two with our listeners.
Oh, certainly, I'd love to. Well, I was reading a quote by Einstein the other day, and Einstein, and I'm going to paraphrase him because I don't have it memorized word for word, but he said, the problems which we face today were created at a certain level of thinking, and we're not going to be able to solve them at the same level of thinking. And I'm paraphrasing him, but that made such perfect sense. How can we, if a level of thinking created a situation, and that situation could be your life, where you are financially, physically, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, in your relationships, if that was created at a level of thinking, and it was, the only way you're going to change it is to change your level of thinking to a higher level. And in martial mastery, of course, as you know, it's just chock full of mind liberating and as well as, physiology, body language, mental warfare, verbal, and all these kind of things. When it comes to thinking, when we learn the mind techniques that were used by so many, the samurai, the ninja, and I don't mean the black Hollywood pajama
right.
of a ninja. I mean the actual real thing, the use of energy and intention. We can see, like a samurai, how did they master their mind to be so resilient, to have life down to an art where not only could they behead someone with a samurai, but they could sit down and make tea perfectly or do perfect calligraphy. That takes an enormous amount of mind power. They weren't just brute warriors. I mean, they had that side of them, but there was a total sphere. And so I began to discover these techniques that they used, including, for example, Mushin, the art of mind, no mind, and the I could give a more contemporary translation of that by saying that your emotional response transfers control to your agitator. So if someone gets agitated, say by something they've heard in the media, they are transferring control to that. Or they could get agitated seeing a sexy chick on a billboard and next to a beer can promoting a beer, and they feel a stimulation when they see that, and so they have a neural association. This beer means I'll get chick like that. And it's subconscious, so the next time they're at the store, they see that beer, and they subconsciously reach for that because of that programming. And so the mind techniques that you can learn, for the example, Mushin, mind, no mind, where you learn the art of detachment, where you learn the art of, and it takes training. You learn if something has been agitating you, or you used to, it's like Pavlov's dog. Remember Pavlov, he would ring a bell and feed them, ring a bell and feed them. Then he'd ring a bell and not feed them, but they'd salivate whenever he rang the bell. Well, when you hear that bell ringing, whatever's been your agitator, you can train yourself by consciously saying, I'm doing it again, let me stop and rewire a different response. And with a little practice, you can respond differently. And then you begin to use this throughout life, and so you look at, say, your finances or your goal objectives in a different way. For example, before the show, you were talking about how you got to start doing a radio show. That was a vision of yours, wasn't it, James?
Yes, it was.
I'm sure a lot of people, a lot of naysayers, you can't do that, this and that. Well, here you are doing it now, and because you start to look at life differently, and you see with this sort of a benevolent detachment, and then you begin to think like water. You know, water doesn't stop. It goes anywhere it wants. It gets through. It goes around, under. So those are some of the techniques that can be used. Zanshin is another one, and that's Zanshin, and your listeners can Google the word Zanshin and find an amazing amount of resources online about what that is. But basically, that means constant alertness, remaining form.
Right.
Now, I believe a founding father said that something about eternal vigilance. Do you remember that quote, James? The price of liberty, something like that, eternal vigilance. Well, what that means for Zanshin, constant alertness, remaining form, is that let's say there's a pack of wolves eating the carcass of a deer, and another wolf comes in, and he fights, and he wins them all, and he begins to drag the deer away, and they all leave. But even as they leave, he's holding his guard up. He is remaining alert and vigilant. See? And if we remain that way about our freedoms, if we remain that way about controlling our own mind so that others don't control it, and we use that constant alertness, remaining form, and it doesn't take effort. It isn't like holding up a billboard and your arms get tired. It doesn't actually take that kind of effort. It's a different kind of thing where you do it, where you begin to do it naturally through practice.
Exactly. And I like what you said, using the beer analogy, making people want to buy more beer. It seems like it was evident in this election that there was a lot of hypnosis used in this election to get this election won. Do you agree with that or disagree?
Well, there's always hypnosis used, and most people don't understand what that is. I know you do understand what it is, James, and that's why it's so great to talk to you, because hypnosis is simply bypassing the critical mind to get in the subconscious mind.
Right.
And that isn't, dangling a bead in front of someone saying you are getting very sleepy. So people hear the word, they don't understand. It's a clinical, medical type of term. It's a real, it's an actual thing, and it's used in every election. It's used by the good team and the bad team. It's used by all. Now, this particular election, when you look at how it was won, you can look at the form and the content and the emotional objectivity, where the guy who won was much more appealing emotionally. And when you see an appeal to emotion, that's, unfortunately, you've probably heard this said, people buy on emotion.
Yes.
And they justify later with logic. See, if people were to buy logically, it'd be a very different world. And so when emotion is used, that's a start too, when they contact with feelings. So every election has it, and I think it's probably been that way since the beginning of time, that hypnosis, and often unknowingly, they aren't trained in the clinical use of it, say like you or I are, but they undoubtedly deal with, they probably have coaches who coach them on how to speak, how to carry themselves, how to handle objections, like any well-oiled salesperson would be. And obviously then you have money into play, and who spent the most money? Well, that's just an astounding and astronomical difference. So we look at all this. But what I choose to do is I choose to realize, hey, whoever wins the election, they weren't elected king. And that's important, because some people freak out and go, oh no, the end is here. And I remember hearing that about and hearing that about Carter, and they said it about Reagan, which I couldn't understand. I realize sometimes we focus too much on that. We need to focus on what we can control. An election, other than going out and voting or maybe donating to our party of favor, we have very little control over that.